Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, Kevin shares his rare path of breaking into private equity at a lower middle market fund right after his MBA at Emory, after stints in consulting and investment banking. Listen to hear why he took a large pay cut, why he didn't want to go back to being an advisor, and how he eventually found himself running investments for a large family office. Enjoy. All right, Kevin, thanks so much for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Thank you.
It'd be great.
Great to be here.
Thanks. Yeah, so it'd be great if you could just give the listeners a short summary of your bio.
Sure. Grew up in California. Went to school at George Washington, both for my undergrad and a master's in information security. Did a brief stint in consulting in New York before doing 4 years in investment banking at a regional bank. Went back to school and did an MBA at Emory University. And after that, I spent 6 years or so in private equity across 2 different lower middle market private equity firms. And for the last 3, almost 4 years now, I've been working at a family office.
Very cool. So let's start all the way back. Well, kind of when I was in school too. So we're both the same age, just past the big 4. We're both past 40 at this point. So tell me a little bit about just an undergrad. Seems like you, I don't see I guess there was some business. You graduated with a business degree, but was finance ever on the radar when you were consulting?
I mean, I was in the business school, but never was on the radar. I was in a program that essentially swapped out my senior year for the first year of a master's program. And the program essentially was a feeder program for kids that ended up in the national security infrastructure. So think of CIA, NSA, DIA. So when I was finished with my program, I was supposed to go in that direction, but I just couldn't see myself doing it. So I pivoted quickly and ended up in consulting.
Why did you kind of decide against it? You just felt like it wasn't a good long-term fit for you, or what about it?
Yeah, that's right. I had a chance to start meeting potential colleagues in different areas, and culturally, it just wasn't the right fit for me. And I couldn't see myself in a 5-year, 10-year path down that career.
Okay, so you're kind of approaching, is this like junior, senior year, and you're thinking, okay, this is not what I want to do, and then you just suddenly started recruiting for consulting, or how did it work? You started networking heavily. I mean, back then, I don't think LinkedIn was a big thing, or was it?
No, it wasn't.
Yeah. So how did you get into Accenture?
I think it was just my final year in graduate school, and I started calling around to alumni, and there was one guy that we hit it off over a phone call, and then eventually sit down a couple of meetings over coffee, and he was working at Accenture at the time, and he pulled me into the recruiting process.
Got it. So it's just good old fashioned dialing. And how many alums?
Dialing for dollars.
Yeah, how many alums did you have to talk with before that one kind of came through?
Oh gosh, I lost count. I mean, maybe 30? 50 or so.
50? Okay,
at very least.
And so you were doing a lot of phone calls. Did you have a lot of like informational meetings? Was this the first person you actually met for coffee and stuff like that, or were there others?
Oh no, there were tons prior to that. And a lot of, I don't know if I can help you, a lot of maybes, and your job in that role is to turn those maybes into yeses. And that's the goal.
And so were there other ones that were going well or had to kind of progressed, or was this the main lead for yourself? Like, did you end up with the one offer from Accenture and immediately take it, or were there other potential options for you?
No, I was running out of time. This was the one offer, and I had to take it. And it ended up being a great offer. It took me to where I needed to go, which was New York.
Got it. And so was at that point, did you even know what investment banking was? Did you know what was your just knowledge base around consulting versus banking versus private equity?
Yeah, I know a lick about investment banking, and I found out a lot about the industry once I moved to New York, and I was in the mix. My project at the time had me on Wall Street, and I was working on a lot of integrations in the back office for different banks as they were getting merged together in the kind of '05 through '07 timeframe, or '04 through '05 timeframe.
And so you're kind of there, you're working as a consultant in these integrations, the back office. Suddenly, how did you learn, okay, I want to get to the front office and I want to
Yeah.
be M&A? Like, how did you end up there? Because that's not an easy, I know there's a lot of consultants that go to banking, but going, typically it's like with an MBA. You didn't do that. It looks like you went straight. So tell me how you pulled that off.
So it's just a lot more of networking. So
You're
I
in New
found
York, so there's a huge advantage.
very, very much so. And we took advantage of that. So there are a couple of us who were in consulting at Accenture, and we all at the same time discovered that we had more of a passion for finance. So we all huddled together in the corners of Accenture's New York office and did the mock interviews, made the phone calls, shoveled back and forth between all the firms. And it was a great experience, and we're still friends to this day.
That's cool. So you kind of found some like-minded people within Accenture who are looking to make the similar transition, helped you practice. So when you're coming up, you were only there for around a year and a half at Accenture. So tell me, like year one, is this whole process start, or was it like earlier?
Within months of getting there, we just decided that as my small piece of the cohort decided that it just wasn't the right fit for us.
Got it. Okay. So,
Started doing the interview process.
and so did you get a lot of interviews or did you strike out a lot? How did you, again, just dialing mostly, or were you using any other online resources?
They didn't really exist at the time. It was just a lot of emails and phone numbers that were passed from other people. You always, at the end of the call, you would ask whoever you were on the phone with, is there someone else that I ought to meet? Can you introduce me to someone else, really at a different firm, so I can expand my network? Are there other potential alumni that we can meet and go out and have coffee with?
Got it. So was the group of friends kind of alums from your undergrad as well?
No, not at all. We all came from different
Different
schools.
schools. Okay. So you're kind of starting this process pretty early on, it sounds like, but you're there for another year before making the transition. Tell me why. Was there a lot? Did you make it to final rounds and strike out? Did you just take a long time to kind of get up the curve with the finance stuff since you didn't come from that background?
Yeah, it took me a while to get up to the curve because I just didn't have that focus in undergrad.
Hmm.
And some of the guys I was interviewing with, they had that traditional finance background. So it was just easy for them to transition.
So how did you close that gap? How did you study?
Just a lot of studying, a lot of just materials that were passed on from other people that I knew within my network, old investment banking tutorials
Yeah.
from the first years.
Got it. Okay. So you finally make it into the process where you eventually end up. Tell me what that was like. So how many rounds did you immediately jump on the offer when you got it? What was the feeling like after working that long for it?
Yeah, so it was multiple rounds, and I ended up having two offers, one at Beer Stearns and one at a regional bank, SunTrust. At that point, I had my fill in New York, and I wanted to see the South. So just packed up my bags and moved to Atlanta.
So you could have been at Bear Stearns during the collapse
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
hadn't made that
Thankfully,
choice.
ended up at a different bank.
Fateful decision, because I think a lot of people would have chosen Bear Stearns given its size and its brand name
Yeah,
over SunTrust. That's interesting. So okay, so you find yourself in Atlanta. Tell me, what was it like, the transition culturally from New York to Atlanta?
it was just different.
Yeah.
Space was just enormous. I had a great apartment there that I thought that was just so cheap relative to New York. I walked to work, which it drew a couple raised eyebrows from my colleagues because everyone drives in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And I was just so accustomed to walking, and a half a mile each way every day was nothing for me.
Yeah. That's awesome.
But eventually, I adapted and ended up starting to drive to work.
What was your thought process in terms of like that first few months? Was there like were you starting as an analyst or first year analyst, or did they give you any
Second year
credit?
analyst, they gave me some credit.
Oh, they give you some credit.
Yeah,
So, okay. A lot of credit. I mean, you basically only lost 4 months then.
essentially, yeah.
So when you were starting, was it kind of with with the second year analyst kind of going through, because you started in August, it looks like, were you starting kind of with those second years with the expectation that that next summer would be your first bonus?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. And then tell me what it was like getting up the curve. Like, so you had studied all this time, and then what was it like when you hit the desk? Were you ready to model right from the get-go, or what was it? What was it
I
like?
thought I could, but it was just a very different experience in application versus theory.
So tell me, what do you mean
It's
by
just a
that?
lot
Like,
of
did you
long
struggle
nights.
like the first few months?
I did. Yeah, on honestly, a lot of it was on the presentations and getting all those together. Um, there were just a lot of strenuous nights.
Like, what would you say? 60 hours, 80 hours, 100 hours?
I worked more than my peer group because I was catching up to them.
Hmm.
So if they were working 70 hours in a week, I would work 80.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds about right. I think SunTrust in Atlanta, it's a great bank, but it's not as sweaty as some of the other places in.
Yeah,
I think you had a good compared to a lot of the poor souls, the analyst souls. Yeah, they're going through work from home right now,
I
just
think so. Yeah,
getting really abused. So okay, so you're working with middle market clients, doing M&A. You're there for a really good run for 4 years, and you get an internal promote to associate. Tell me
that's
about kind of how you ramped up and how you feel, why you feel like you got that analyst promote. Because I know back then it wasn't as common.
no, it wasn't. Well, maybe it was more common at SunTrust because they liked to grow their own talent.
Hmm. So was your
And
thought, I'm going to do this for my life?
actually, at the time, yeah, I did.
Yeah,
And I think at the time, SunTrust didn't really have a MBA pipeline, so they were forced to grow their own talent.
got it. Okay,
Or
so
then find experienced bankers to supplement at the director level.
tell me what happened over the years, because how things shifted. Like, obviously, as you're an associate, did you start having analysts under you, or just occasionally, or were you still
Yeah,
doing a lot of analyst work?
you do some analyst work at almost every project,
Yeah,
but yeah, so it ended up having 2 or 3 analysts on any given project.
got it. Okay, and then how did it progress? So when did you start looking elsewhere? Or did the financial crisis obviously happened.
Yeah,
Tell me
yeah,
how things kind of, what was the thought process there? Like, did M&A just dry up and then they started letting people go, or what happened?
yeah. It dried up very quickly, and there was just no business. So um, at that time, you look for an off ramp, and that's business school.
Right.
So I was working with a few private equity clients at the time, and one late night, I had a phone conversation with them and let them know that I'd be heading off to business school. And he suggested that I should probably get private equity experience prior to business school because if I wanted to end up in the industry, I would have to have some type of tangible experience because I would be a non-traditional, um, I guess,
It's great advice.
applicant. It is.
Yeah.
And I turned it on its head by asking him, well, since you're providing that advice, would you provide that experience for me as well? And he did.
So before you even went to Emory for business school, he gave you an internship of sorts, or did he just get?
Yeah, that summer before business school, I spent 3 months here in Dallas.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
That's awesome. And so that's huge, because then you're at least going into recruiting with that kind of at the top of your resume.
that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so tell me about what was business school like? Was it a blast? Were you nervous because you thought it's still going to be an uphill battle to get into PE?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Given that you just have that internship, I mean, there's other kids that have done 2 years. And so what was the thought process going into that whole, was it immediately like very focused to recruiting, or was it something more like, let's have fun for a couple of years, I've worked hard?
Yeah, I mean, it was just all about recruiting.
It was
It
okay.
was first, second, and third thought when I got up every day of how to get into the industry.
And so it seemed like you had had a lot of success with networking before. So was that just the same thing? Just dial for dollars more?
That's right. Yeah.
Is that how you ended up landing in the at the firm you did?
Yeah, I was just persistent about it. There's just a lot of no's, and you turn those no's into maybes and then ultimately to yeses.
How do you do that? How do you turn them into maybes, first of all?
Well, there were a lot of trips to New York from Atlanta.
Yep.
And uh, just a lot of hustle. I mean, I'll give you an example. So there was a partner at a middle market private equity shop that I had targeted, and he would just wouldn't return my emails and wouldn't return my phone calls.
How many?
So probably 6 or 7 emails,
Wow.
half a
Over
dozen
like
phone
four
calls,
months, over 4 months or 5 months?
half a year or more.
Yeah.
So I had a 3 hour block of time when I was in New York. So I went to his office and sat in the lobby. And finally, after a couple of hours, his secretary came out and said, "You are very persistent. He'll meet you for 15 minutes." And he did.
And
I didn't get a job.
but you met with him,
I did.
and did you have like a pitch ready? Like, what did you say? I'll work for free. Like, what did you say?
No, I mean, it's exactly that. You have 5 minutes, you have a canned elevator speech. You try to highlight why you would work uh, and culturally and how you would have the right experience to set and skill set to do the job.
So like
Um,
you weren't closing it. New York was definitely on the anywhere was on the you were willing to move anywhere in the world.
yeah, I was trying to break into the industry.
Yeah. So kind of no constraints. And I think that's important for the listeners to listen to. No constraints, super hungry to the
Yeah.
point where you're like sitting in people's offices uninvited. They didn't call security on you, which is good. So
No, and we're still friends to this day.
that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So you had that. Tell me what was the break finally? And a lot of no's. Were there any other were there other partners of small funds that were kind of a little bit more open to taking calls and they just still were like, sorry, there's no room?
Yeah, a lot of them were telling me that just wasn't enough room. Some of them were in between funds, and some of them were in funds that weren't growing. So you just had to find the right timing where a fund was in fundraise and the AEM was growing and they needed another seat.
And tell me about how you found those people just talking, just dialing. There was no like database that you used. There was nothing.
No.
Sounds
And so,
brutal. Sounds brutally heavy lifting. So at what point were you thinking, hey, this isn't going to work out? Did you ever have that thought go through what you were going to do if you didn't break into PE?
I knew that in the back of my mind, I could always go back to Accenture. I had an open invitation to go back to the firm.
Not back to bank. You would go back to banking?
And I would probably end up in consulting for a while and plot out another path to get into private equity.
Interesting. You were very determined. You were very determined. So why PE? Why was PE this almost like this thing you put up on a pedestal? We see it today with a lot of the kids. Was there
Yeah.
something about it that you just loved? Was it the upside? Was it just the idea of being an investor? What was most appealing to you?
It was the idea of being an investor and operationally changing a business and pulling levers that as a banker or as advisor, I could only hear about after the fact.
Got it. So you liked having that like actual direct impact. I think it's pretty cool too. Getting to
It
work with
is.
CEOs. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. I
I love
like small to mid-sized businesses
yeah,
because you can have
yeah, that
more impact.
in the job that you ended up getting, you were working with lower middle market businesses between 3 and 10 million of EBITDA. And those businesses have a lot, typically don't have like the professionalization, the professional management team or anything running them. So there's a lot of value add for
Yeah.
them. So tell
And
me
that's a
how,
standard playbook where you can pull to
yeah,
generate that lift.
yeah. Tell me a little bit about like when the big break happened or did it ever happen? Did you have to grind with no job for a while? Tell me what happened.
So most recruiting happens your first semester in business school for the summer. And I just had to not go down that path and just put myself out there on the line. And it didn't really have a summer internship until maybe the final months of the spring. And I
Wow.
finally got one with the old private equity partner that gave me an internship prior to business school.
So he said, fine, you can come back and do a
He did.
summer.
He did.
So you owe this guy a lot, obviously.
Yeah. And so I ended up post business school working for him and moved out to Dallas in 2011.
So tell me, like it sounds like it's a relatively small fund. Do you mind sharing what the AUM was at the time? Um,
Sure. It was 120 million.
so yeah, it's a pretty small fund. how was he comfortable paying you? I mean, were you just willing to take really low, a really low salary with minimal upside? Like how did he get comfortable with that? Because at 120,
Yeah,
um, you know, a post MBA can be expensive, right?
sure. So I was their first non-partner hire.
Okay.
And a lot of it was back end weighted on the upside.
And did you ever get that upside?
It was a fund that did not hit the promote.
Okay. So you were there for a long time.
Yeah,
Tell me what your thought. So you were, I mean, the title was kind of whatever they wanted to call you, senior associate principal. Doesn't really matter because there's
yeah,
probably only a few of you guys there.
that's
Tell
right.
me what the thought process was of going to a fund like that where the pay was probably a big pay cut compared to what you could have gotten in banking or
Correct.
consulting. You were just very like, this is what I want to do. I don't care. Was that the thought process?
That's right. I just wanted the reps.
Yeah,
And I wanted the autonomy to figure out a way to grow my career and not be an advisor.
got it. What turned you off so much to being an advisor?
Um, it's just, it was too salesman.
Yeah.
Uh, and you really never, I just fundamentally didn't believe that you you helped the business or changed in any manner.
When you got
You
your
were
hand,
just you're a broker essentially.
yeah. Did you get your hands dirty once you were at this PE fund?
Yeah, I had the opportunity to. And it was fun.
It was fun. Yeah. So
Yeah,
you were right. You're like, this is fun. I enjoy going to work.
and it was worth it. Yeah, it was worth the trade off.
Very cool. So tell me about as things progressed, was the reason, after 4 years, were you given like a potential partner seat, or was it just the fund wasn't growing fast enough? And at that point, it was time to start looking. What was that next transition like? I know you spent another almost 3 years at another lower mid market fund.
That's right. So the partner I was working with and I both were recruited by the our next employer, the new private equity fund, to start their Dallas office. So it really helped to wind down, and I'm still helping wind down the assets from the first private equity fund. And then we hung the shingle out for an East Coast based private equity fund that established its Dallas office.
Very cool. And so was it just more of the same? So it's really like you were at a new fund, but in reality, you were working with the same partner.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, were the types of businesses you work? Was it a specific niche, or it was just lower middle market? Anything?
We were generalists, but I focused on industrial services and business services.
Any crazy stories from any of those deals you did?
Well, there was one business that did a lot of hydroblasting and turnaround cleaning for industrial facilities. We owned the business at our fund, but back in 2005, I was an advisor for that business when I was an analyst at SunTrust. So I knew the business and knew the owner, and immediately I was able to develop a rapport with him. It was just visiting an old friend again.
That's cool. That's cool. So it was a great easy way to kind of hit the ground running there. So,
That's right.
um, tell me a little bit about kind of the progress. Almost 3 years with that fund. And was it a similar size, a couple hundred million AUM?
No, I think RLJ at the time was about 240 million AUM.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit bigger, but they're plenty more employees. So.
Yeah. Okay. And so then from there, what was the next stop? At any point where you like, I don't know about this PE thing because the pay hasn't been great, or were you working long hours, or was it more like a 50, 60 hour week, but you were enjoying it?
The workload varied depending on whether or not we had a deal that was live.
Right.
Um, I was on a partner track, but the firm was really top heavy. And it was just I could see myself being there for a protracted period of time and not getting to where I wanted to be. So I was trying to figure out ways where I could leverage the experience and skill set that I had developed over the past almost decade,
Yep.
and somehow accelerate my career development.
And so how did you think about like the different options? Like you didn't want to at that point go back to an advisory role that was like off the table for sure, or was it
Yeah,
anything you ever considered it?
not really.
Yeah. So you were just thinking, what other options are there, right? You've done a bunch of deals at this point, right? What were you thinking in terms of options? And then, yeah, I'd love to hear about the actual jump you made
Yeah.
and how you found that position.
Well, I just had an open mind, and I would just softly inquire with some wealthy families and individuals whether or not they were inclined to bring on an investor to support their efforts. And one family that I'd known and met just for a short period of time, but they were looking for someone to start a family office for them. And that the patriarch of the family just so happened to previously work within the same network of private equity firms that I worked at in Dallas before heading off and starting his own business and becoming very successful at that business. So there was just a natural network of people that we knew that allowed him to establish rapport and trust with me quickly.
So it's something you kind of pitched, or he was looking?
I pitched him, and he was looking at the same time, although he
Yeah.
didn't let on that he was.
Interesting. So yeah, but there was some of that trust because you had this that similar connections. You said like there was some
That's right.
vouching and stuff like that, which always helps.
He worked in the same office that I worked at in Dallas, but maybe 15 years prior.
Oh, okay.
In fact, it was odd that my first day of work there, there was a picture of him in my office because as he left a picture of himself in every office, and it just sat there for years until I showed up.
That's so funny. So you, as you're transitioning from the private equity fund, RLJ to this new family office, what's the concern? Like, is there any concern going on? Because I know family offices, they're all very different, and you're starting this one. Like you are at ground zero again, very entrepreneurial. What's the thought process, and is there a good enough? Did you feel like you had to build a lot of rapport early on? Like, was it a 6 month courtship before it actually you made the jump, or was it like a year? Was it took a few months? Or?
It was about a year courtship before I made the jump.
Yeah. And tell me about how that went down, because I think people are interested in family office dynamic, and I know they're all different, but there's
Yeah,
something to be said for like building that trust and like how you even went about. How did you even know to pitch to build a family office, and what was specifically what was like what was interesting about your background? Yeah, you had the connection, so there was that trust element, but
sure.
was there something you were pitching of like, hey, I know middle market businesses really well. I can, in the whatever the 20 to $50 million range, we can do some great deals together, and I can help manage them. And what was that similar to kind of how you pitched them, or what was it a
Yeah.
different angle?
I think a lot of it was timing. I think we're in a period where there's a generational transfer where a younger set of family members are now entrusted with the capital. And I think a lot of families are becoming more aware of fee load and how it drags performance. And I think the third thing is that a lot of families are starting to realize that they can internally originate deal flow that once they thought only private equity firms could do.
Yeah, they could do the direct deals themselves
Yeah.
and have a
Yeah.
small team kind of run it, especially if it's at the lower end of the middle market.
And so that was my pitch. You have an allocation to alternatives instead of directing them to mega cap funds that generate suboptimal returns, particularly for the risk profile, and being tethered in a 10-year, but in reality, a 12-year fund or more.
Hmm.
When you can instead direct your capital in lower middle market opportunities, which I would argue at the time and still do, that they provide better risk adjusted return. It allows you to really.
What about diversification? Was it not as much of a concern because their alternatives wasn't like a 50% allocation?
That's right. And
Yeah.
my position was that you can build a fund directly.
What do you mean by that? Build a fund.
Um,
Seed it with
allocate
it.
capital, and over 5 or 6 investments, you can synthetically create a fund with
Right.
a bunch of direct investments.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. You're creating a fund, so you're still getting that diversification somewhat.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's really cool. That's different. That so
And it worked.
it
Yeah.
worked. It worked, and you had some good investments over the time.
Yeah. I mean, it was a short period of time, maybe a little bit over 2 years, but
How many deals did you do for them?
maybe 4 or 5. The coolest one was a high growth, better for you consumer brand that manufactured beef jerky, but did it in a better for you manner. its processing style is called biltong, which is a South African way of air drying meat without the use of nitrates and nitrites.
Oh, cool.
So located in Plano, so a suburb of Dallas.
Yeah.
Um, and we were able to provide it growth capital in two different rounds. And it recently got announced it's being de-SPACed by SPAC.
Very cool. So it's basically going public.
That's right.
And so the family's very happy.
Very happy.
That's awesome. How do you think about going to a family office and being a hired gun of sorts in terms of your pay structure?
Yeah.
And do you mind let's talk about pay because you took a huge pay cut going to private equity right out of school to get into the industry. Can you talk about like how pay progressed? Was it like something where you were taking super low base because the fund was so small, like, 50,000, 80,000, or was it something where like you're at least paid six figures and just there wasn't a lot of carry? How should
Yeah.
I think about it?
Um, in my first private equity fund, it was six figures, but I was in it for the carry.
Yeah.
Because I was the only non-partner in the fund. They could allocate a significant portion of the carry to me.
Do you mind sharing what that was?
It was double digits.
Double digits.
That was
Okay.
a
And
percentage
yeah, and
of
so that's great. And so, but did that pay off down the
no.
road? It never did.
It did not.
Okay.
It was a debt that did not pay off.
Okay. And then how about the second? Did things change? I know the fund got bigger to about 250 million. Did the economics change where there was a little bit of a bonus or was it all
Yeah.
just base and carry again?
So the comp became much more market based, and so did the carry. It was just a lot smaller
Yeah.
and more market based.
A couple points and
That's right.
150 base, something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And we're in the couple years you were there, were the bonuses decent?
Yeah, they were.
Okay. Do you mind sharing what they are? My
they,
listeners kill me if I don't ask. You can say no, I don't want to share, but that's
they were decent.
okay. That's fine. So you're kind of like you're heading in the right direction, at least with pay. And then you're kind of thinking, why even go to this family office? Why not just it was still top heavy, I guess. I mean, it was still going to take a long time to become partner. Was that the kind of the reason?
Yeah, that was the rationale at the time.
Or is it more you just being opportunistic and talking to people and thinking, hey, this might be more interesting?
Well, I knew that I wanted to make a move, but
Okay.
I didn't give myself 1 year to figure it out. I wanted to make sure that I was running to something instead of running away from a top heavy structure.
Got it. Okay. That's fair. So you're at the family office for almost 2.5 years, did 4 deals, which is a lot, actually. It's good. It's hard to get deals done. So it sounds like things are going great. Why, was it pandemic related? What was going on in terms of the latest transition last year?
So it was a family.
And by the way, whatever you're comfortable sharing, Kevin, I don't mean to push you, like whatever, whatever you're comfortable sharing, you can say, I'm not comfortable. Fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was working for a family in Houston, and my family was based in Dallas, and I was commuting back and forth for 2 years. And when we started along this journey together, we decided that we give ourselves 2 years before I had to make a move to Houston. And my wife did not want to move. So we didn't. And after a while, I knew that it would become an issue with the family.
So, meaning you had to get away from Houston?
I had to move to Houston, or there would be an issue with the family that I could not fix.
Got it. Okay. So, tell me a little bit about, because I see I thought you were in Dallas now.
Yeah. And I've been in Dallas ever since graduate school. So since 2011, but I was working for a family in Houston.
In Houston. And so the commute it was just too much.
That's right.
I got it. And so you couldn't move. The family wanted you there. And so that was it. Tell me a little bit about, like, was it contentious at all? Was it like something where, I mean, at that point too, in 2020 May, I mean, it's chaos. The world is chaos. Why jump in the middle of chaos? Why not like keep moving on? Was it like was it something where like they had been talking to you about moving for a while and then they were like, that's it?
That's right. I mean, and at the same time, a recruiter called probably in the fall the year prior
Yep.
and started introducing me to this family that I work for today,
Yep.
a Dallas-based family
Hmm.
that I thought very similarly to about how to invest like I do.
That's great. That's great. So you already kind of had something where you had been talking with this recruiter and with this other family office,
That's
and
right.
then this kind of prompted a, hey, I think I'm ready to move. Um, that's great. So it sounds like you've managed to kind of piece together a really nice trajectory for yourself.
Thanks. It's been a wild ride.
Yeah, I think what's interesting to me is that the fact that you grinded so hard to get into PE, but not to, but were humble enough to go to a very small AUM place just to get the reps. I think a lot of people say they want it, but then they're not willing to do what you did and take a big pay cut um, to get the reps and then gradually build themselves up from there. So kudos to you.
Thanks.
That's really cool. Yeah, before we call it, like any final kind of words of wisdom? How I guess well, before we even call it, how's it been at the new family office in terms of like through the through the epidemic or the pandemic? How's it been? I know probably at the beginning there was no deals to be done, but then have things opened up for you guys at all?
Oh, we've been real active. I think we've done 6 deals
Wow,
in actually we've done seven since June.
that's
Uh,
amazing.
yeah, we've
And so
been
how big is the team?
extremely active.
How big is the team that you, is it just you and a couple, an analyst or something like that? Or
Yeah, so in the fall we hired our first associate. We've been blessed to have him. Great background. He has that traditional 2-2 background. Two
yep.
years in Barclays in Houston. 2 years at a private equity firm in Houston called First Reserve.
Hmm.
And then he wanted to move back to Dallas, and we found him.
That's awesome. I was going to say, if you want applicants, just let me know and you'd get flooded. Just from the podcast.
Yeah,
Eventually, if you need somebody, just let me know.
we'll
Because I think
do.
these types of jobs are few and far between. They're hard to find, and I think they are attractive.
Yeah,
So very cool. So you guys done a lot of deals. Oh, just the two of you.
yeah. I mean, it's been varied too. We've done some real estate, a fair amount of structured debt, and then a few deals backing independent sponsors.
Let's talk
And
about that. Let's talk about the structured debt. Like, tell me about the types of deals and how you even think about those deals. I mean, it sounds cool because you're getting a lot of exposure to different asset classes, right?
yeah,
And up and down
yeah.
the capital structure. So tell me how you're thinking about that.
So we like to find opportunistic credit where we have some type of collateral where it feels and looks more like a senior secured loan, but we have mezzanine type yield.
Hmm.
And so the approach is to work with commercial banks where their lenders find opportunities that don't particularly fit inside a credit profile or the underwriting box, where the opportunity might straddle one leg in the box and one leg outside the box.
Can you
And
give an
so,
example of that, like of what would be a non-traditional thing that
yeah,
that the
so
commercial bank would shy away from, but you guys would be fine with?
sure, if there is litigation embedded in the company,
Hmm.
um, a credit officer might shy away from getting the total maximum leverage that in a normal situation might warrant. So we can step in to that situation and take a last out piece of the debt, but
Hmm.
still have that collateral coverage.
Enough collateral coverage to get comfortable
That's right. And
and
still get to
still
sell.
demand a little bit of some warrants or whatnot on the back end, like a mez.
In some cases, yeah, we'll get warrants. In almost every case, we'll get call protection. In some cases, we'll get a fair amount of OID to juice up the yield.
Very cool. This has been great. I think one of the more interesting, different podcast guests.
Yeah,
Because yeah, I have plenty of guys and gals that have gone through banking, traditional PE,
yeah,
but not the way you've gone. So, any final words of wisdom before we call? Before we call it?
yeah. Just believe in yourself. If this is what you want to do, don't take no as the final answer.
Awesome, Kevin. Thanks so much for sharing your story.
Thanks for the time.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick at wallstreetoasis.com. Until next time.